Hello, I am Leslie DeChurch. I'm the moderator of our scientific session, Understanding and Enabling Human Travel to the Moon and Mars. Thank you all for joining us or for watching the recording, whichever it may be. Today, we're all assembled here to have a live interactive discussion that builds on the three pre-recorded videos that perhaps you've already seen. In the videos, we heard from interesting combinations. Tom Williams and Alexandra Whitmire at NASA talked to us about the challenges of long-distance space exploration in tandem with Jack Stuster, a longtime researcher studying astronauts. Then we heard from Nashir Contractor at Northwestern, his cutting-edge research, computer models of group behavior, along with luminary in this area, Nick Canis. And third, we saw Dorothy Carter at the University of Georgia, who's leading a very large interdisciplinary team studying spaceflight multi-team systems, and renowned team scholar and NASA scientist, Suzanne Bell. So we have a dream team assembled here today. Please feel free to put the questions in Q&A, but we're excited to get started. And so I'm going to ask to begin with, if you haven't seen the video, Tom Williams at NASA did a great job of kind of laying out some of the key things that we're thinking about in long distance space exploration and the human element. Things like altered gravity, extreme levels of radiation, effects on the brain, problem solving, being far from Earth in a hostile closed environment, and highly isolated. So my first question to all of our panelists today is, when you think about all of these factors in deep space exploration, what do you think specifically is really new and different, and how does that affect this human element of space? And I'll ask Jack Stuster to start us off. Oh, you're muted. Will we be doing that between Mars and Earth?
Could you say that one more time? What is different?
What is most of all the things that are different, right, between orbiting the Earth somewhat close in the space station versus getting into a capsule and heading out for a 3-year journey with 4 or 5 other people? What do you think is the single biggest difference?
Several years ago, one of the first astronauts who I had the occasion to meet, we were on the dais together. He was there to receive an award. I was there to talk about what an expedition to Mars would be like. And I described the sequence of events and the stressors involved and the durations involved. 6 to 9 month transit to Mars, 18 months on the surface, another 6 to 9 months return. And at this time, my opinion of my expectations about astronauts was pretty much determined by Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, in that astronauts were highly confident in their abilities, perhaps even overly confident in their abilities. And I was shocked when, after the presentation, the former astronaut, came up to me and said, "You know, your description of what a mission to Mars would be like has me thinking, and I don't think I'm cut out for that. I was perfectly happy being part of the Earth shuttle moon system, but the idea of getting in a spacecraft and heading off toward a point in space where Mars is going to be in 6 or 9 months, as Earth recedes in the rear view, figurative rear view mirror, to a dot, and my destination is a dot. I just don't think I'm cut out for that." I think it's the distance and durations involved that make it very different. Low Earth orbit has become a well-traveled path. Our word for routine comes from the French for a well-traveled path. And as the space station and low Earth orbit have become well-traveled paths, there's a lowering of the tolerance for the lack of amenities, and that is going to happen to the crew while they're very far away and not only 240 miles from Earth.
Wonderful. Suzanne, what do you think?
Well, I'll answer in a little different direction because that was a great answer by Jack. But in regards to thinking about teamwork, there's going to be a fundamental paradigm shift from what we have now on the ISS, which is very fluid boundaries. If someone needs social support, they can call down to their family. If they need direction, mission control tells them what to do, you know? And so very fluid boundaries right now. But as we go to Mars and the distance increases, the shift will be that it's now an intact unit, and that intact unit becomes the fundamental decision maker for what's happening right then. And so I know that in several of the presentations, and then I'm sure we'll have more conversation on it today, just that idea that the team will become much more central to problem solving and decision making, and then, you know, becomes this petri dish of the interpersonal relations as it becomes a very intact unit that's a lot less fluid with different people coming into the situation.
And Nashir.
Again, this is a wonderful question, and I think that one of the ways in which I get at something similar to what we've already heard from Jack and Suzanne, but I was really struck when I read recently a way of characterizing the difference between a mission to Mars and anything we've seen until recently, and it revolves around the fact that, pardon the pun, but everything we've done so far revolves around the Earth. When we go to the International Space Station, that's going around the Earth. When we go to the moon, we're going to an object that is going around the Earth. And for the first time, when we go to Mars, we will be going to a place that's not going around the Earth, but in fact, like the Earth, is going around the sun. And that is a major, in my mind, a major mind shift, because it points to the fact that in order to get from here to Mars, you're now chasing an object that, like you, is orbiting the sun. And what that does in terms of our mindset is, for the first time, whether we are on the space station or the moon, we always were able to see the blue marble. We were able to see the Earth rise 16 times a day on the International Space Station and set 16 times a day. When we get into the psychological mindset of being on a different planet or on a way to a different planet where we do not have any visual contact with the Earth, we have the same set of issues that I think Suzanne and Jack touched on. And that is a recognition that we are on our own. We have to have a lot of autonomy. We have to think of ourselves as being in a self-standing, self-floating, as the case may be, situation. And I think the psychological impact of that will result in a level of conditioning, of coalitioning that we have never seen before. The idea that mission control today is known as, that they say that, you know, the crew on the space station or on the moon, et cetera, were the eyes and ears of the mission, but that the mind was of the mission control, the brains were in mission control. That goes out of the window for the reasons that Jack and Suzanne talked about.
Wonderful. Alexandra, do you agree? Go deep space means we shift how we think about the brain and the eyes.
Can I answer the question, the original question, before we move on?
Absolutely.
I think that I like to think about stressors that impact on people. And to me, Mars had several new stressors we've never had before. One people have alluded to, actually some 10 years ago, we coined the term Earth out of view phenomenon. And we don't know that it exists, but it's sort of an issue that might affect psychologically what it's like to see the Earth as an insignificant dot. And the other panelists have mentioned that. I think I like to nowadays call it the disappearing Earth, because it'll be getting progressively smaller and progressively larger. But that will have something to say about the psychology. Other stressors might be because of time and distance that Jack and others have talked about, is Autonomy, this crew will be very autonomous, which not only has a lot to say with how they function, but mission control. What will mission control be doing during the time that this crew is very autonomous? They won't be directing traffic like they do now, or be available for immediate synchronous discussion of emergencies. So I think that's another issue, is the autonomy and time delay. Maybe 44 minutes is a maximum round trip time delay, depending on when Earth and Mars are in their orbits, but you can't get the support you get from your family and mission control in real time like you can now on Earth. And finally, overdependence perhaps on onboard resources and equipment. If anything breaks down, you got to fix it, and you can't wait for supply to come. So I think that reliance on onboard equipment is another stressor that's going to be new on a Mars mission.
Wonderful. And Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you. And all such great and insightful responses. Really appreciate hearing from everyone. I think a lot of the issues that have been brought up are spot on. We also think about, one other challenge to consider is the vehicle volume that we've known has been much more spacious, facilitated by low Earth orbit. And so as we go on to a Mars mission, and we're talking 2.5 to 3 years, we will not have the volume that we have now. And so from a team perspective, are we limiting the team's ability to, at times maybe physically withdraw to kind of come back restored? There's just a lot of potential limitations in as Jack mentioned, the distance and the duration and how that's going to challenge, in addition to the other issues that have been mentioned today.
Dorothy Carter, what are we missing?
Yeah, so to echo some of what others have already spoken about, right before this call, Jack was filling us in on the dangers of actually landing physically on the surface of Mars. And, he can speak to the technical details of that in great depth, it seems like. But I was taken away from that discussion that it's really going to be one of the most terrifying moments of the mission to date at that point. But not only is it like the most terrifying moment of the mission, it's simultaneously the moment where they have the longest communication delay that they've experienced at that point. And so from a multi-team system perspective, that's going to be just immensely different in comparison to the way that NASA's multi-team collaboration has transpired in the past. As part of our project, we've done a big deep dive into archival documents, especially the Johnson Space Center interviews or oral history interviews. And pretty much every time that they're talking about a adaptation, a technical difficulty that they run into, there's this cycle of the front-facing team notices it, and then they iterate back and forth in real time with the mission, with the ground control, develop this shared understanding of the problem space and the decisions and that sort of thing, and then the crew executes it. But with the long duration mission, it's like the crew is going to have to do all of that iteration and decision making and problem solving in real time, and then fill in the ground control after the fact and kind of develop that shared understanding later. So I think from a multi-team collaboration perspective, that seems like a huge hurdle and that they need to be prepared for.
Fascinating. While we're monitoring the Q&A to see questions that come in, the next question for the panel. So as a lot of these comments allude to, there's a big difference between what we call LEO or low Earth orbit, which is, as Jack pointed out in French, the well-worn, well-traveled path, and the new traveled path. And one thing that was interesting in the videos that Jack and Nashir and Suzanne kind of touched on is that not everything is bad. There might actually be, Jack talked about some of the diaries and how ISS astronauts appreciated a little bit of peace and insularity, and Nick and Nashir talked about the cohesion effects, that this might actually be positive. There might actually be some positive effects. So I'm wondering if we want to talk a little bit more, if you could elaborate on that about, we can go through our panelists in no particular order, something you think might get better in long distance exploration.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Is it what's going to improve
Yeah, so
psychologically?
we just talked about what's going to be harder. What's going to be a little bit easier?
Nothing. The crew will be autonomous, and we're all big boys and girls, and we like to function on our own and do things on our own. And for some crew members, I suppose they will like that feeling of not being told what to do and being watched all the time, and feeling that they're kind of able to function and do their work as it evolves and as the stressors of being on Mars occur. So I suppose for some crew members that ability and the sense of being free to do their work on their own schedule will be a positive thing.
I'm almost reminded that it's like astronauts in low Earth orbit and to the moon are like teenagers who are being controlled and parented by mission control. And they might feel a sense of liberation, for better and for worse, when they are finally out of their teenagehood and are now ready to become adults on their own right. We do see murmurings of that even in the history of space already, where there have been instances where crew members, there's a very famous, controversial, notorious as the case may be, episode from Skylab, the third Skylab manned mission, where there was a point of time where the crew members were really quite antagonistic towards mission control and were so exhausted that they basically said, we're going to shut down communication for a period of time. Now, there's some controversy about the extent to which it happened, but the Harvard Business actually has a case study called Mutiny in Space. And they talk about the fact that the three of them got to the point where they decided they were going to take matters into their own hand, et cetera. So you've seen that these kinds of issues have surfaced in the past. The other part of it that I would say is that in our interviews with crew members returning from the International Space Station as part of our NASA research, we will occasionally hear mention of facts like, the task schedule or the playbook, which is something that NASA takes very seriously. It's exactly telling you what you could be doing from time, from 7 to 7:15 and so on, that even though NASA mission control really believes that everyone on the crew is following that playbook, that in fact, there are some licenses that are taken, some liberties that are taken from that playbook that is actually helpful. They do it because they want to help other people. And they often will say that even if there's a task that is specified as a solo task, there's no such thing as a solo task. Every task is in some ways a team task, which someone has to be there. We help other people if we see them falling behind. And so from that point of view, I think that there is the opportunity for autonomy to give them a greater sense of ownership and a level of commitment that might be beyond what they would experience as a frustrated teenager.
No, sure. You mentioned a Harvard case study titled Mutiny in Space.
Yes, I think so.
I think it's called Strike in Space.
Sorry, Strike in Space.
Right.
The
Okay.
Wikipedia page may be called Mutiny in Space.
Okay.
But it's about that mission. Yes.
There's some background, I'm sure, that they tell me if they include this in their description, but that was the third human mission to Skylab, called Skylab 4 or Skylab 3, whether you use Arabic or Roman numerals. And even though it was the third mission, you would think that the crew would have been fully aware of the infrastructure in place, but they weren't. The crew was supposed to remain in their Apollo capsule for 24 hours before entering Skylab. And they didn't want to stay cramped. The reason for NASA wanting them to stay was because they wanted to mitigate the effects of space adaptation syndrome,
Right.
this vestibular phenomenon that afflicts a third to a half of all space travelers. It's kind of like motion sickness, at least the effects are, but anyway, so they talked mission control into allowing them to enter Skylab right away. One of the crew members promptly barfed.
Yes.
And
yes.
among themselves, they said, let's just not tell mission control that this happened. And for some reason, they were unaware that there was an open comm channel at all times.
Yeah.
And so transcripts of their secret conversation were on the desks of every NASA manager the next morning. And they were scolded severely for having tried to keep something from mission control. That's how they got started in this 84-day expedition to Skylab. And from then on, mission control was on them constantly with unrealistic schedules, work schedules. And finally, they were supposed to have every other Sunday as a free day and to rejuvenate. And they didn't do that. They were scheduled 24/7. And finally, halfway through, Captain Gerald Carr said they just turned off their comm and stopped responding to the calls. And the next, NASA became alarmed. And the next day they had what Jerry Carr called the first sensitivity session in space, where they talked about what the crew was experiencing, and mission control talked about their expectations. And they decided, okay, what we're going to do is only hard schedule those tasks that are required to be performed at a certain point in an orbit. Comm tasks, they didn't have constant communications then. It was only during few portions of the orbit of each orbit that they could communicate. There were certain things that were Earth observation that had to be done at a certain point, but everything else would be put on what they called a task list, and you could just go to that task list and take a task and go do it. And from that point on, the crew performed admirably. They accomplished all of the objectives and many more than had been set for them. It was not it might have been a labor action. So yeah, maybe strike might be more appropriate, but certainly not a mutiny.
No, that story, thank you for sharing that story, Jack. The only thing I'd add to it is that before they were scolded, they had Capcom to come on and ask them, is there something you want to tell us? And that's when they got the first inkling that maybe word had got out to them, et cetera, on that particular story. But that's a fascinating example. And it shows this notion of autonomy being particularly important. Nick, sorry, I cut you off.
There might be another issue going on with that crew. That crew was always behind. They were following up the second crew that was very successful and a bunch of Boy Scouts, and they're really go-getters. And this crew had trouble keeping up. In our studies, we found a significant correlation between perceived stress within the group on a number of measures and perception that mission control didn't support them, which we predicted as an example of displacement of tension from an in-group to an out-group. In this case, from the crew members on the Mir and also the ISS in 2 studies to mission control. So I think it could also be a reflection of tension within the crew in a isolated small group, displacing their tension outwardly. You know, it's awful hard to complain to someone on whose life you depend. I mean, you depend on your crew members, and that's your social network, it's your living network. And it's much easier to complain to people on the outside. We all know this. When your boss tells you to do something and you don't want to do it, you don't tell your boss off, you go home and you yell at your wife or your husband. And, you know, and so you displace your tension to somebody who's safer. And we found evidence for that. And I think this particular Skylab crew, there's always a possibility that their behavior reflects an inner tension they had in cohesion on board.
And I'll just add, Nick, that we did a lexical analysis. Nashir led this a couple of years ago, looking at all of the transcripts of the conversation, and that crew was unique in terms of the mental overlap in what they were thinking about and talking about at the same time. So as sort of a lexical marker of crew cohesion, we certainly saw that they were the least differentiated, whereas the previous Skylab missions, you could really see a difference between the crew and the mission control, which was in some ways healthy. But it was more even in terms of the communication in those two. I want to shift a little bit to some teams experts. So as we're talking about this kind of challenge, in the crew and this need to develop cohesion. I want to turn to Dorothy and Suzanne. What are you most worried about with the crew and with mission control?
Well, I also wanted to follow up on your previous question about what might be even better this round. According to research on intergroup relations and multi-team collaboration, giving groups that don't necessarily work together as effectively in previous phases a really desirable, strong subordinate goal that everybody really wants to work towards and has to work with each other to achieve can help intergroup relations. And I do think that this is one thing that the Mars mission offers kind of human society in general across the Earth, that it is a huge, really desirable subordinate goal. It's kind of the next possibility for human exploration. And, we've covered the whole Earth at this point. That to some degree, like that is a difference between, ISS missions versus Mars missions, that it's providing this huge subordinate goal that hopefully will encourage positive relations across nations and that kind of thing. So maybe that's
So hopefully we'll do better that subordinate goal, Dorothy, than the planet pandemic subordinate goal.
so true.
Suzanne, what do you think?
Yeah, so Leslie, I'm going to answer it very specifically to the way you asked it, which is, what do I worry about regarding teamwork? And I think one of the things that I worry about is that there seems to be a disconnect between the crew's belief in their team as a whole, both in their capabilities and their cohesion, with how their relationships are. So we've seen this in research with Leslie and Nashir that we have together is, we'll see relationship fracturing happen, and the team level estimate of this team is great, this team is cohesive, doesn't really dip. In fact, things have to be going really poorly before it starts to dip in the team level cohesion. And so I worry a little bit about people not realizing how important not only the team is as a whole, but that they have good working relationships with each person, and that the relational level is healthy, not just the team level.
And to build off of that, I worry, based on the conversation that we were just having, that as this crew is traveling further and further from the Earth, and whether it's real or not, they have this strong sense of cohesion, and they need to learn to rely on one another so much more than they have in previous missions, that's going to cause so much less communication and reliance on the Earth, even when they really should be. Even, they say, oh, it's going to take 20 minutes, forget it.
That's right. Yeah, I think when everybody's talking about just how interdependent mission control and the crew are right now, I think if anyone wants a good example of that, just watch something like an EVA on the NASA channel and don't look at the screen. And just listen to it. And it's almost indistinguishable if you're in mission control or in the crew. They are so interdependent back and forth. It's really just a different paradigm than what it would be with a 22-minute communication delay. So, Dorothy, I think you're spot on with, as the crew becomes more cohesive, what happens. I will add something on why that's a worry for me, is because in our data, we see that as there's an isolate, as there's subgrouping, that there are terrible and just really big effects on team performance. So people are communicating less with one another. People are pulling back from that effective teamwork, even if they have a strong belief in the crew as a whole, but not with different individual team members. And so, to have a false belief in how well you're doing while your performance is really going down a negative spiral is concerning, because in such a long crew, such a long mission, a crew really needs to be self-aware and do team care and really look to be successful in the long run. And so that self-awareness is very important to maintaining good performance over time and well-being.
And I'm glad you took us there, Suzanne. I think it's worth bridging into talking a little bit about team performance and crew performance. So in Tom's video, he talked about how, and Dorothy, your comments alluded to this also, that when there's a problem on the ISS, it could be noticed in mission control, it could be troubleshot in mission control, and the crew could be sound asleep and wake up to a set of instructions about a critical procedure that's been fully designed and pre-tested on Earth that they need to do. And Jack did an elegant task analysis of the Mars reference mission that we've all kind of seen. So when we think about team performance, what are some of the dimensions that really come into focus as a result of some of these new tasks? And I'll put it out in no particular order.
Well, I think one thing that relates to performance and cohesion is leadership. In our study, we looked at the task role of the leader and the support role of the leader, two roles that have been discussed. Oh golly, Jack, I think going back to the Antarctic, the old Antarctic missions, people were talking about telling people what to do and setting up the base camp and supporting them when it gets winter over and it's monotonous. And we found significantly that for mission control teams, that both the task and the support role correlated significantly with cohesion. In other words, crew members rated their group most cohesive when they rated their leader as being supportive and a good task master. We didn't find that in space. We found that in space crews, there was no relationship with the task role of the leader. There was a significant relationship with the support role. That the crew members felt their crews were cohesive if their leader was supportive to their needs. We think we didn't find it in the task because our crews were small. They were basically, we studied mainly 3-person crews, and everybody's a leader at some level in a 3-person crew. The engineer, when they have engineering tasks, kind of takes over and does the leadership, and the commander does the leadership in other activities. And so it was a small group, but I'm not sure about going to Mars if we're talking about 4 people, if that'll be different. Certainly if you're talking about a 6-person crew where you have a little hierarchy, the task role leader becomes much more important. But leadership's critical, especially the support role of the leader in helping crew perform and perceive itself as cohesive.
What do you think, Nashir?
Tom actually also made reference to that. He said that in his presentation, he talked about the fact that a good leader needs to know when to lead and when to follow, and when to let others lead, et cetera. And that becomes a really important issue. And I think a couple of other thoughts that came through my mind as I was thinking about the questions that Leslie is posing. One is that, because of the distance, again, from Earth in terms of being on Mars, the Martian day, the sol, is actually not exactly the same as that on Earth. And so this is something that already people on Earth who are communicating and coordinating the robots have experienced. And that is that the sleep cycle that we follow, if we want to track the crew on Mars, our own sleep cycle back in mission control and so on is going to get shifted so that but you start at 9 o'clock in the morning, the next day will become 9:20 and then 9:40. And pretty soon you're starting your day in the evening if you want to keep track of when the crew is live in there as well. So these are other issues that will have repercussions back here on Earth that we're not used to seeing so far if you're trying to track those kinds of issues. But also to Nick's point, you mentioned in passing, what if it's a 3-member crew or a 4-member crew or a 6-member crew? This is a really important issue that I know there are several people at NASA and elsewhere who are trying to decide it, because once you think about the amount of maintenance work that goes in even at the space station, increasing the number of people on station by 1 actually has a significantly larger increase in the amount of research that gets done, because each time you add a new crew member, you now have opened up most time for research and so on, because of the maintenance work doesn't increase linearly with the number of people on board. So there is also issues of whether an odd or an even number of individuals will make or break coalition and alliances. And so there's a lot of deep thinking that needs to go into understanding the right size of the team which in some ways is a play on Tom Wolfe's right stuff argument that he made previously about astronauts. But now we need to right size the team as well.
Jack, I'm looking at you because of your comments you made on the video, which I would agree with. I think that, and maybe you could comment on this comment. I think that you mentioned that engineering run organizations pay a lot of attention to space and mass, and psychologically run organizations pay a lot of attention to people, interpersonal dynamics and psychology and personality. And from my point of view, a crew of 6 or 7 is going to be, would be much more tolerable in a long haul mission than a crew of 3 or 4, which is currently being looked at. You might have some more comments on that, Jack. I agree with your comments.
Well, I mean, the size of the crew is determined by their objectives, by the tasks that are to be performed. And to try to perform all of the required tasks with a crew of 3 or 4 would be foolish, mission threatening. Also, to consider whether it should be an even number or an odd number. I mean, do you remember talking about this back in the early 1980s? Someone was advocating an odd number crew because then you could have a tiebreaker on a vote. And I was just horrified by the thought of going on an expedition to Mars where decisions were made by democratic vote. I mean, it was absurd. You want things to be, decisions to be data driven, not by personalities. And so, yeah, a crew of 6, our task analysis conducted by Jareen Adolph and Vicki Byrne and myself, found that a crew of 6 could accomplish all of the, with cross-training, careful selection and cross-training, could accomplish all of the objectives. Could be done with a crew of 5, but, and even with a crew of 4, but if anything goes wrong, major objectives of the expedition would not be completed, and it would be mission threatening. So, I mean, for people to be having discussions about the size of the crew, separate from what the objectives and requirements of the mission are, is absurd, and they shouldn't do that. Similarly,
Jack, I have a question for you. So do you think that the mission objectives should ebb and flow according to, you know, what's even comfortable in a small capsule? So the social density, you know, how do you see that playing in? Because I agree that you wouldn't expect somebody to, a team of 4 to accomplish what 6 people would be needed to accomplish. But at the same token, I sure would hate to stick 6 people in such a small space that it just becomes, you know, untenable with between equipment and what they need for exercise and all of this stuff. So it seems like it's kind of a tripod of, you know, social density and mission objectives and kind of these different interpersonal dynamics that come into play, among other things.
They would need more space, period. I mean, you can't send a capsule on a 6 to 9 month expedition to Mars. Imagine this. I mean, I've used this metaphor before. Imagine you and 5 other people climb into a motorhome and you drive around the country for 6 months. You can't go outside. You can't even look outside. The windows are blacked out. You've trained with these people for 3 or 4 years. You know everything about them. You know every annoying mannerism that they have. You know every joke that they've ever told. You know all about their families. And you're with them in this motorhome for 6 months. And you get to your destination. You can actually go to a slightly larger habitat. And there you stay with those same 5 people for 18 months. You get to go outside once in a while wearing a spacesuit, but for the most part, you are confined with those 5 other people. And then after 18 months, you get back in that motorhome and come back to Earth for 6 to 9 months. Now imagine that your motorhome is so decrepit that it's going to take a year to get to Mars. And instead of spending 18 months on the surface, you spend 300 days on the surface. And then you have a year to come back. That's what they're talking about as a mission plan now, which is absurd. It's a recipe for disaster. You either go with the data-driven approach or you don't go at all. You wait till you have faster propulsion.
So this brings up a really good question, and one that Jack alluded to, and it's a question I think for Alexandra and also Suzanne representing NASA. So a lot of what we're talking about here is really the human factor in space. And Jack, you give a great example. The current Mars reference mission doesn't include a pilot, despite the fact that all the Apollo 11 flights had an autopilot system. Every single captain promptly shut it off. And so my question to Alexandra and also then to Suzanne is, how do these insights about the human factor in space make it into reference planning, mission planning, into training, into selection? What's the formal kind of integration mechanism for that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and we really appreciate Jack's feedback on that in his response. I'm optimistic. I think that there's organizational changes that have happened to facilitate those evidence-based recommendations. The contributions that Jack and Nick and others have made equip us to take data forward and to advocate for these types of changes. And we had a meeting this morning where we are getting requests from headquarters for data-driven, human-centric feedback to define new DRMs. So I think that there's certainly a desire from the agency and a recognition that these types of missions are unprecedented, that the human has to be at the center. And there are boards that facilitate sort of the formalization of these kinds of discussions. There's liaisons from groups such as Space Medicine, Human Research Program. Their role is really to be that interface with the more engineering and program management types of boards. So I've seen over the years a shift, I think, in how decisions are made. I think we have opportunities to go into to continue to advocate, and we really appreciate the contributions from the community, because really the data that we have is what really allows us to go forward. So I think we're getting there, and I think for our Mars mission we will see that shift.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with Sandra's inputs there. Most people watching probably don't know me, but I was a 17-year professor for a number of years and collaborated with Leslie and Nashir, and then actually just this month joined NASA as the lead for the Behavioral Health and Performance Lab. Although I've worked a lot with NASA previously to joining as a civil servant, and I think it's really neat to see the integration process from the inside, because these missions and just what NASA and our international partners are trying to do is just such an incredible thing to do. And I as a psychologist, like to think about the different psychological inputs. But that's really a piece of all of this, certainly an important piece for something like Mars. So it's really neat to watch these boards of how this information integration happens. And it does really rely on both the expertise of external researchers to provide that insights to people like Sandra or me, so that then when we're at these meetings, we know, the different inputs and the different things that are going on. But it's really a really nice integration process. And, doing anything so large across so many people obviously is challenging. But a lot of what's done is very systematic in a really good way. So, for example, I think, Jack, you were talking about like the different elements that would go into, team size. And that's what a team size would be. That's very systematically approached in targeted research in areas we don't know. and then, you know, integrating it in trade space analyses and other things to say, hey, everything's a trade-off.